Welcome to the Billionaire's Choice. Subscribe and turn on notifications to enjoy more heartwarming stories of love and destiny. Let us know where you're watching from, and let's begin today's story. The richest people in the world can buy almost anything, except the chance to witness genuine kindness when no one believes anyone is watching. Snow drifted lazily across the streets of downtown Chicago, covering the sidewalks in a thin white blanket that softened the city's relentless pace. Office towers shimmered beneath the evening lights, their glass walls reflecting 1,000 moving headlights below. Employees poured out through the revolving doors of Whitmore Global Headquarters, eager to escape another long workday. Some hurried toward the train station. Others disappeared into waiting rideshares. A few laughed over dinner plans. But one young woman quietly walked in the opposite direction, away from the bright restaurants, away from the shopping district, and away from everything people expected after a 12-hour shift. Inside the back seat of a black luxury SUV parked across the street, Declan Whitmore loosened his tie and rubbed his tired eyes. At 38, he had built one of the country's fastest-growing investment companies, yet success had slowly transformed every evening into another meeting, another report, another negotiation. His driver waited patiently for instructions, but Declan barely noticed. His attention shifted when he recognized a familiar face leaving the building. Eliza Rowan, administrative assistant. Quiet, reliable, always the first one to arrive, usually the last one to leave. If anyone had asked him about her an hour earlier, he probably would have described her as efficient and forgettable. She never interrupted meetings, never sought attention, never competed for promotions by talking louder than everyone else. She simply did her work with calm professionalism and disappeared before anyone remembered she had been there. Yet tonight something felt different. Instead of heading toward the subway entrance, Eliza crossed 3 busy intersections carrying 2 oversized canvas bags that looked far too heavy for someone her size. Declan glanced at his watch. It was nearly 8 o'clock. Curious, he leaned forward. "Follow her," he said quietly. The driver looked surprised through the rearview mirror, but nodded without asking questions. The SUV rolled slowly behind her, keeping enough distance to remain unnoticed. Block after block, the skyline changed. Expensive boutiques gave way to aging brick buildings. Crowded office workers disappeared, replaced by quiet streets lit by flickering lamps. Finally, Eliza stopped beneath an elevated train bridge where several people huddled together against the freezing wind. Their coats were worn. Their backpacks rested beside shopping carts filled with everything they owned. Some sat silently. Others exchanged tired smiles as they recognized her approaching. Before Declan could process what he was seeing, Eliza's entire expression changed. The exhaustion from work vanished from her face. She smiled with genuine warmth as if she had just arrived at a family gathering. She knelt beside an elderly man wrapped in an old blanket and handed him a steaming container of homemade soup. "I made your favorite," she said softly. "Extra chicken this time." The man laughed, his weathered face brightening in a way money could never purchase. "You remembered." "Of course I remembered," she replied with a grin. She moved from person to person, greeting each by name. She passed out sandwiches, knit hats, thick socks, and hand warmers. She listened far more than she spoke. One woman showed her a photograph tucked carefully inside a worn wallet. Eliza studied it with sincere attention, smiling as though it were the most important picture she had seen all day. A younger man admitted he had an interview the following week. Instead of offering empty encouragement, Eliza reached into one of her bags and handed him a neatly folded dress shirt still inside its dry cleaning cover. "This should fit," she whispered. "Keep believing tomorrow can look different." Not once did she take out her phone. There were no selfies, no live streams, no speeches about generosity. There wasn't even anyone else around to applaud her. She acted as though kindness needed no audience beyond the people receiving it. Declan remained perfectly still inside the SUV, watching through the tinted window as snowflakes settled quietly across the shoulders of his expensive wool coat. He had attended charity galas where donors competed for photographs beside oversized checks. He had listened to executives describe compassion with polished presentations and carefully rehearsed smiles. But this was something entirely different. It was invisible generosity, the kind that happened after business hours, in forgotten corners of the city, where nobody expected recognition and nobody offered applause. Nearly an hour passed before Eliza packed her now empty bags. She hugged an elderly woman goodbye, promised to return in 2 days, and disappeared into the snowy night, carrying nothing except a small thermos and an empty backpack. Silence filled the SUV. Even the driver seemed unable to find words. Declan never looked away from the sidewalk where she had stood moments before. Finally he spoke, his voice lower than before, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "bring me everything we have on Eliza Rowan." The following morning, the top floor of Whitmore Global felt exactly as it always did, polished marble floors reflecting the sunrise, assistants moving briskly between conference rooms, and executives carrying tablets filled with numbers that could influence entire markets before lunch. Yet for the first time in years, Declan Whitmore found himself ignoring the quarterly forecasts spread across his desk. Instead, a slim personnel file rested in front of him. It contained only a handful of pages. Eliza Rowan, age 29, administrative assistant, employed for 4 years, excellent attendance, outstanding performance reviews, no disciplinary history, no requests for special treatment, no unusual expenses, nothing that explained the woman he had watched beneath the train bridge the night before. He flipped through every page twice before looking toward his chief of staff. "Is that everything?" he asked. "Everything human resources has," she replied. "She keeps a very quiet profile. Most people barely notice her." Declan closed the folder slowly. "That is beginning to sound impossible." Across the building, Eliza started her day exactly as she always did. She arrived 20 minutes early carrying a reusable coffee mug and a small insulated lunch bag she had packed before sunrise. She greeted the security guard by name, thanked the janitorial staff for keeping the lobby spotless, and paused long enough to hold the elevator for 2 interns who looked nervous on only their second week. None of those small moments seemed important to her. They were simply habits. By 8 o'clock, she had already organized meeting schedules, answered dozens of emails, and quietly solved 2 calendar conflicts before anyone realized they existed. When one of the copy machines jammed outside the marketing department, she fixed it without calling maintenance. When a new employee looked lost searching for a conference room, she walked him there herself, even though it added several minutes to her own workload. Nobody applauded. Nobody even noticed. They simply accepted that things somehow ran more smoothly whenever Eliza was nearby. During lunch, several coworkers gathered around a table discussing expensive vacation plans and the latest luxury apartment opening downtown. Someone asked Eliza if she planned to travel this summer. She smiled politely. "Maybe another time," she answered. "I have a few other priorities right now." She did not explain that nearly every extra dollar she saved had already been carefully divided into envelopes sitting inside a kitchen drawer at home. One envelope paid for groceries. Another covered rent. A third was labeled winter supplies. A fourth simply read meals. Every Friday evening, those envelopes slowly became soup ingredients, fresh bread, warm socks, gloves, and blankets for people whose names most of the city had forgotten. She never considered it charity. To her, it felt more like keeping a promise she had quietly made years ago. Late that afternoon, Declan stood inside his office overlooking the city while watching employees leave for meetings below. His thoughts kept returning to the image of Eliza laughing with strangers beneath falling snow. He had built businesses by learning to recognize value before anyone else did. Investors called it instinct. Competitors called it luck. Declan knew it came from paying attention when everyone else looked away. Something about Eliza refused to fit inside the ordinary description contained in her personnel file. He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Have we finalized the volunteer initiative for next month?" he asked. "Not yet," his chief of staff replied. "Good," Declan said after a brief pause. "Do not announce anything until I review it personally." He ended the call and walked back to the window. Far below, employees streamed through the front entrance exactly as they had the evening before. Somewhere among them, Eliza would leave the building again carrying that same worn canvas bag. The difference was that this time, Declan intended to learn whether the compassion he had witnessed had truly been part of who she was, or whether it had simply been one extraordinary night that nobody else had ever seen. 3 days later, Whitmore Global announced a company-wide volunteer initiative that immediately became the most discussed topic in every department. Employees received an email inviting them to spend Saturday serving at several community organizations across Chicago. Participation was completely optional, yet dozens signed up within hours because senior leadership would also be attending. Conversations quickly shifted from quarterly targets to which executives might appear and whether local news stations would cover the event. Declan approved every detail himself, but deliberately stayed away from the planning meetings. He wanted the opportunity to feel ordinary, not staged. On Saturday morning, the parking lot outside a neighborhood community center filled with employees wearing matching company jackets. Coffee stations, breakfast pastries, and photographers welcomed everyone as they arrived. Several managers eagerly positioned themselves where cameras could capture the best angles. Others spoke enthusiastically about giving back while checking their reflections in nearby windows. Declan observed everything from a comfortable distance without introducing himself to the volunteers. Dressed in simple jeans, a navy jacket, and a baseball cap, he blended easily into the crowd. Few people recognized the founder of the company without his usual tailored suits and executive entourage. Eliza arrived carrying the same faded canvas bag Declan had seen earlier that week. Instead of joining the breakfast table, she quietly walked inside the building and asked the coordinator where help was needed most. Within minutes, she had tied on an apron and started preparing food boxes beside two retired volunteers who clearly appreciated an extra pair of hands. She laughed with them naturally, listening to stories about their grandchildren while carefully arranging fresh fruit, canned vegetables, and handwritten encouragement cards inside every package. When another employee accidentally stacked several heavy boxes the wrong way and they tumbled across the floor, Eliza hurried over without hesitation. She helped gather everything, thanked him for volunteering, and smiled before returning to her own station. She never suggested that someone else had made the mistake. She simply solved the problem and moved on. Around noon, a television crew arrived unexpectedly after hearing about the corporate event. The atmosphere changed almost instantly. Employees straightened their jackets, adjusted their hair, and looked for opportunities to stand near the reporter. One department director even asked whether additional food boxes could be carried outside because the lighting would be better for interviews. Declan noticed Eliza quietly stepping farther into the background. When the reporter approached asking if she would like to describe why she volunteered, she smiled warmly and pointed toward one of the retired women beside her. "She has been serving this neighborhood for more than 20 years, Eliza said. "You should hear her story instead." The reporter gladly accepted the suggestion, and within moments the camera focused on the elderly volunteer whose eyes filled with grateful tears. Eliza returned to sealing food boxes as though nothing remarkable had happened. Declan watched every second. Most people dreamed about being noticed. Eliza seemed happiest making certain someone else received the recognition. Later that afternoon, volunteers delivered supplies to several local shelters. As they unloaded boxes from a delivery van, one little boy admired a colorful winter scarf sticking out of Eliza's canvas bag. Without thinking twice, she wrapped it gently around his neck and adjusted it until he smiled. She did not mention that Chicago evenings were still cold or that she had planned to wear it herself on the train ride home. She simply said, "I think this color looks better on you." The child beamed with quiet pride while his mother thanked her repeatedly. Eliza only wished them a wonderful weekend before walking away. Standing across the parking lot, Declan realized he had now witnessed the same pattern again and again. Whether anyone was watching or not, whether cameras were present or completely absent, her choices never changed. Kindness was not something she performed. It was the way she naturally moved through the world. As the volunteers packed up for the day, Declan looked toward his chief of staff and spoke softly enough that only she could hear. "Do not schedule an interview," he said. "Schedule a conversation. I think I finally found the person I have been searching for." Monday morning began like every other Monday inside Whitmore Global, except that an unexpected message appeared in Eliza Rowan's inbox at exactly 9:15. The subject line simply read, "Meeting request." Beneath it was one sentence that immediately made her heart skip. "The chief executive officer would like to meet with you at 10 o'clock in the executive conference suite." For several seconds, she stared at the screen, wondering whether the email had been sent to the wrong employee. She read it again. Her name was correct. Her employee identification number was correct. Everything about the message was unmistakably intended for her. Nearby coworkers noticed her expression and immediately began guessing. Maybe you are getting promoted, one said with a smile. Another laughed. Or maybe somebody important finally noticed how much work you actually do. Eliza smiled politely, but remained unconvinced. She quietly reviewed her calendar, confirmed that she had completed every assignment on time, and could not remember making a single mistake that would justify a meeting with the founder of the company. At exactly 10 o'clock, she stepped onto the private elevator leading to the executive floor, smoothing the sleeves of her simple navy blazer as the doors opened. The top level of the building felt surprisingly quiet. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, while original artwork lined the hallway. A receptionist greeted her warmly before escorting her toward a conference room instead of the large executive office she had expected. When the doors opened, Declan Whitmore stood alone beside the windows, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thank you for coming, Miss Rowan," he said with an easy smile. "Please, call me Declan while we are talking." She accepted the coffee carefully. "Thank you, sir." He smiled again. "I think we can eventually retire the word sir." His relaxed tone eased some of her anxiety, yet she still could not understand why she had been invited. After a brief conversation about her years with the company, Declan asked a question that caught her completely off guard. "What do you usually do after work?" Eliza hesitated for only a moment. "Nothing very exciting. I cook. I read. Sometimes I volunteer." She answered naturally, never imagining that he already knew part of the truth. "Volunteer where?" he asked. "Different places," she replied. "Mostly wherever people need an extra pair of hands." She never exaggerated her efforts or listed accomplishments. She described them as ordinary parts of life. Declan listened without interrupting. The more she spoke, the more convinced he became that the woman sitting across from him had no interest in impressing anyone. Finally, he slid a thin folder across the table. "For the past year," he said, "our company has been planning a new nonprofit initiative focused on helping people rebuild their lives through education, employment, and long-term support. We have funding. We have partners. We have facilities. What we have not found is the right person to lead it." Eliza looked at the folder, but did not open it. "I am not sure why you are telling me this." Declan met her eyes calmly. "Because I want you to lead it." The room became completely silent. She actually glanced behind her as though someone else might have entered unnoticed. "There must be some misunderstanding," she said softly. "I am an administrative assistant. I have never managed a foundation. I have never led an executive team." Declan nodded. "I know exactly what your job title says." He paused before continuing. "Job titles tell me what people do between 9 and 5. They do not tell me who they are when nobody is watching." Eliza looked at him with genuine confusion. "I do not understand." Declan smiled gently, but chose not to reveal everything just yet. "You do not have to answer today," he said. "Take the proposal home. Read every page. Ask every difficult question. If you decide to accept, I believe you can change more lives than you ever imagined." Eliza slowly picked up the folder, still unable to believe the opportunity resting in her hands. As she thanked him and walked toward the elevator, one thought echoed through her mind again and again. She had entered the room expecting an ordinary meeting. She left carrying a future she had never been brave enough to dream about. Eliza spent the entire evening reading the proposal at her small apartment, turning each page more slowly than the last. The document described a vision far larger than a traditional charity. It outlined job training programs, partnerships with local businesses, affordable housing initiatives, financial education workshops, and mentorship opportunities designed to help people regain independence instead of relying on temporary assistance. The budget alone exceeded anything she had ever imagined managing. She closed the folder, looked around her modest living room, and quietly whispered, "There has to be someone more qualified." Yet every time she prepared to place the proposal back inside its envelope, she remembered the faces beneath the train bridge and the countless conversations she had shared over homemade soup. She knew exactly what many people needed because she had listened without trying to solve everything at once. The following morning, she requested another meeting with Declan. When she entered his office, he immediately noticed the uncertainty in her expression. "You barely slept," he observed with a gentle smile. Eliza laughed softly. Was it that obvious? Only to someone who has spent plenty of nights staring at impossible decisions. She placed the folder on his desk. "I believe in everything written here," she admitted. I just do not believe I am the person who should lead it. Declan remained silent for a moment before asking a simple question. Why do you volunteer every week? She looked surprised. Because people matter. Why do you remember every name? Because everyone deserves to feel seen. Why do you keep going even when nobody thanks you? She smiled thoughtfully. Because kindness is still worth doing even when nobody notices. Declan leaned back in his chair. Exactly. Those answers cannot be taught in business school. Management skills can be learned. Financial reports can be explained. Leadership begins with the reason someone chooses to serve. His words settled into the quiet room. For the first time, Eliza considered the possibility that he truly meant every word. If I accept, she asked carefully, what happens next? Declan smiled. You stop working alone. Within days, her schedule transformed completely. Instead of spending every hour behind a desk, she visited community organizations across Chicago with Declan and a small planning team. They toured neighborhood learning centers, employment agencies, family shelters, and nonprofit organizations that had spent years helping local residents overcome difficult circumstances. During every visit, Declan introduced her as the future executive director rather than his employee. Each introduction made Eliza blush with embarrassment, yet he never hesitated. He wanted every partner to understand that her perspective mattered. At one community kitchen, she quietly suggested replacing one-time meal distributions with weekly cooking classes that taught families how to prepare affordable, healthy meals on limited budgets. At another location, she proposed creating interview preparation workshops where volunteers could practice job interviews and receive donated professional clothing before meeting employers. Instead of dismissing her ideas, experienced nonprofit leaders began taking notes. They appreciated that every suggestion came from genuine conversations with people who had lived through hardship rather than assumptions made inside corporate boardrooms. Declan watched those conversations unfold with growing admiration. He noticed that Eliza never entered a room believing she had all the answers. She asked thoughtful questions, listened carefully, and waited until everyone had spoken before offering practical solutions. The more people shared their stories, the more confident she became. One afternoon, they visited an abandoned warehouse that Whitmore Global planned to renovate into a workforce development center. Dust covered the concrete floors while broken shelves lined the walls. Most visitors saw an empty building. Eliza stood silently near the entrance for several moments before smiling. This could become something beautiful, she said. The first room should feel welcoming, not intimidating. People who walk through these doors have probably heard enough judgment already. The first thing they should receive is respect. Declan looked around the vacant space, then back at her. He realized she had not imagined a building. She had imagined the people who would one day walk through it. In that quiet moment, he became more certain than ever that offering her the opportunity had not been a gamble. It had been the beginning of a future capable of changing far more lives than either of them had originally imagined. Weeks passed, and what had begun as an ambitious proposal slowly transformed into something tangible. Construction crews renovated the old warehouse while community partners finalized training programs. Local businesses committed to offering internships, and volunteers signed up faster than anyone had expected. Yet the greatest transformation did not happen inside the building. It happened during the countless hours Declan and Eliza spent working side by side. They traveled across the city together almost every day, visiting organizations, listening to community leaders, and refining every detail until each program reflected dignity rather than charity. One rainy afternoon, they stopped at a small neighborhood diner after finishing a series of meetings. It was the first quiet moment either of them had enjoyed in days. The waitress recognized several volunteers from a nearby shelter and greeted them by name before pouring fresh coffee. Eliza smiled warmly, asking about the waitress's daughter, whose college acceptance letter she had celebrated weeks earlier. After the waitress walked away, Declan looked at her curiously. You seem to remember every person you meet. Eliza stirred her coffee thoughtfully. People remember how they are treated long after they forget what was said. I try to make every conversation count. Declan nodded slowly. That explains why everyone trusts you so quickly. She laughed softly. Trust is never quick. It is built one promise at a time. Her answer lingered in his mind for the rest of the afternoon. A few days later, they visited the train bridge where Declan had first seen her without revealing that memory. Several familiar faces greeted Eliza with genuine affection. An older gentleman proudly announced that he had recently started working part-time at a neighborhood hardware store after receiving interview coaching through one of the pilot programs she had quietly organized months earlier. Another woman excitedly showed Eliza the keys to a small apartment she had finally been able to rent. Eliza celebrated each success as though it belonged entirely to them. She never accepted credit. While the conversations continued, Declan stepped a few feet away, watching the scene unfold. He realized something remarkable. These people did not admire Eliza because she had resources. They admired her because she had consistently shown up long before resources existed. Later that evening, as they drove back through downtown Chicago, the city lights reflected across the windshield in long golden lines. The silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, Declan spoke. "Can I tell you something I have never shared with many people?" Eliza turned toward him with quiet attention. "Of course." He looked out the window. Before beginning, "When I was 12 years old, my father died unexpectedly. My mother lost almost everything within a year. For several months, we moved from one temporary place to another while she worked every job she could find. We were never completely alone because strangers kept helping us. One neighbor left groceries outside our door every Friday without signing a note. A local diner owner quietly gave my mother free meals whenever business was slow. Someone paid my school lunch balance without telling us who they were." His voice remained calm, but every word carried the weight of memory. "Those people never asked for recognition. They simply decided that our family mattered." Eliza listened without interrupting. "I promised myself that if life ever gave me more than enough, I would spend the rest of it becoming the kind of stranger who had once saved us." He smiled gently before continuing. "For years I believed writing checks was enough. It helped people, but something always felt incomplete. Then I watched you beneath that train bridge. You reminded me that kindness is not measured by money. It is measured by presence." Eliza finally understood why he had asked such unusual questions during their first meeting. She smiled with quiet emotion. "I never knew you had seen me there." Declan nodded. "That night changed the direction of this entire foundation. I thought I was searching for someone to manage a project. Instead, I found someone who understood its purpose better than I did." Neither of them spoke for several moments after that. The rain continued falling softly against the windows while the city stretched endlessly before them. For the first time, the partnership that had begun as an unexpected opportunity started to feel like something far deeper, built not on wealth or position, but on two people who had independently learned the same lesson long before they ever met, that the smallest acts of kindness often become the greatest turning points in someone else's life. By early autumn, the foundation had become one of the most talked-about community initiatives in Chicago. Local businesses proudly announced new hiring partnerships, families shared stories of fresh beginnings, and the renovated Workforce Center welcomed its first group of participants with classrooms, interview spaces, and career mentors. Newspapers praised the innovative approach of combining practical education with long-term employment opportunities instead of offering only temporary assistance. Yet as public attention grew, so did private criticism. Success has a way of attracting admiration and suspicion at the very same time. During a quarterly board meeting, several directors reviewed the latest reports with obvious satisfaction until one board member quietly closed his folder and leaned forward. "The numbers are impressive," he admitted, "but I have concerns about appearances." The room became silent. "What appearances?" Declan asked evenly. "Your executive director was an administrative assistant only a few months ago. Now she is leading the most visible project our company has ever launched. People are starting to ask questions." Another executive reluctantly added, "Some investors have mentioned the same thing. They believe the promotion happened unusually fast." Declan remained calm. "She earned every responsibility she has received." "That may be true," the director replied, "but perception often matters as much as reality." The conversation ended without a decision, yet the damage had already begun. Within days, anonymous comments appeared on business blogs and social media. Some questioned Eliza's qualifications. Others suggested that her rapid promotion could only be explained by favoritism. None of the accusations contained evidence, but they spread quickly because speculation often travels faster than truth. Eliza first learned about the rumors when she noticed two unfamiliar employees lowering their voices as she entered the break room. They smiled politely once they realized she could hear them, but the conversation stopped too abruptly to ignore. Later that afternoon, one of her closest coworkers quietly showed her several online posts. "I thought you should know," she said gently. Eliza read the comments in silence. Some claimed she had manipulated her way into leadership. Others insisted she had received opportunities more experienced professionals deserved. The words stung, not because strangers misunderstood her, but because they ignored the years of quiet work that nobody had ever seen. She closed the screen and forced a small smile. "Thank you for telling me." That evening she remained alone in her office long after everyone else had gone home. Looking around the nearly empty room, she wondered whether accepting Declan's offer had unintentionally placed the foundation at risk. If people questioned her integrity, they might eventually question the entire mission. She thought about every family depending on the new programs and every partner who had trusted the organization. None of them deserved to become part of a controversy. The next morning, she requested a private meeting with Declan. When she entered his office, she carried a single envelope. He immediately sensed the seriousness in her expression. "What is that?" he asked quietly. She placed the envelope on his desk without sitting down. "My resignation." Declan looked at the envelope but did not touch it. "Why?" "Because this foundation is becoming bigger than either of us," she answered softly. "People should be talking about the lives being changed, not about me. If stepping aside protects everything we have built, then it is the right thing to do." Declan slowly stood and walked toward the window before turning back to face her. "Do you believe the rumors?" "No." "Do you believe you earned this position?" She hesitated for only a second. "Yes." "Then why should honesty surrender to gossip?" Eliza lowered her eyes. "Because I never wanted to become the story." Declan picked up the unopened envelope and gently placed it back into her hands. "I asked you to help people rebuild their confidence," he said calmly. "I cannot allow you to lose your own because of voices that have never witnessed your character. Leave this office with your resignation still in your hand, because I will never accept it." Although his words comforted her, Eliza could not ignore the growing storm surrounding them. As she walked back through the executive hallway, she realized the greatest challenge they had faced so far would not come from limited funding or difficult projects. It would come from proving that genuine integrity could withstand even the loudest doubts. The weeks leading to the official opening of the Workforce Development Center became the most demanding period either Declan or Eliza had experienced. Every classroom had been furnished, every training program had been reviewed, and every community partner confirmed attendance for the public launch. Despite the growing criticism online, participation continued to exceed expectations because the people who had worked beside Eliza understood exactly who she was. On the morning of the opening ceremony, dozens of business leaders, city officials, nonprofit directors, and reporters gathered outside the renovated building. Television cameras lined the sidewalk, while volunteers welcomed guests through doors that only months earlier had belonged to an abandoned warehouse. Eliza stood quietly inside one of the classrooms, taking a slow breath before the event began. She had never enjoyed public attention, and the recent rumors made the moment even more intimidating. Declan entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee, just as he had during their very first meeting. He handed one to her with a reassuring smile. "You still look more comfortable serving meals than standing behind a podium." She laughed softly. "That is probably because it is true." He nodded. "Then do not pretend to be someone else today. Just be the person I met beneath that train bridge." His words reminded her of everything that had brought them to this moment. Minutes later, the ceremony began. Several executives spoke about the company's commitment to strengthening communities through opportunity instead of charity. City leaders praised the partnership between local organizations and private businesses. Finally, the master of ceremonies invited Declan to the stage for the closing remarks before the ribbon cutting. The audience expected another speech about corporate responsibility. Instead, Declan paused for several seconds, looking across the crowded room before speaking. "Over the past few months," he began, "many people have asked why I selected someone with an ordinary job title to lead the most important foundation our company has ever created. Some believed the decision happened too quickly. Others questioned whether experience had been overlooked." The room became completely silent. Reporters immediately lifted their cameras. Eliza remained seated in the front row, her heart racing. Declan continued with calm confidence. "Today I want to answer those questions publicly because every great organization deserves complete honesty. He stepped away from the podium and looked directly toward Eliza. Several months ago, after leaving work one winter evening, I watched one of our employees disappear beneath a train bridge carrying homemade soup, blankets, gloves, and winter clothing. She believed nobody was watching. She knew every person there by name. She listened to their stories. She expected nothing in return. I returned several times without introducing myself because I wanted to understand whether that kindness was real or simply a performance. Every visit gave me the same answer. A quiet murmur spread through the audience. Many executives looked at Eliza with surprise as they realized the story was about her. Declan smiled warmly before continuing. I did not promote Eliza Rowan because she impressed me inside this building. I invited her to lead because of the character she demonstrated outside this building when there were no cameras, no applause, and no rewards. Leadership is not proven when people are watching. Leadership is revealed when nobody is. Several volunteers who had worked beside Eliza beneath the train bridge unexpectedly stood from their seats. The elderly woman who had once been interviewed instead of Eliza smiled through grateful tears. The hardware store owner who had hired one of the first program participants applauded. One by one, community leaders, families, former shelter residents, and business partners rose to their feet until the entire room echoed with sustained applause. None of it had been planned. None of it had been requested. It happened because dozens of people had experienced Eliza's quiet kindness long before the public ever learned her name. Reporters quickly shifted their questions away from rumors and toward the lives already transformed by the foundation. Instead of discussing anonymous accusations, interviews focused on participants who had found employment, secured stable housing, or returned to school through programs Eliza had helped create. By the end of the afternoon, the story dominating local headlines was no longer about controversy. It was about a leader whose greatest qualification had never appeared on a resume, but had been written for years in the lives of the people she had chosen to serve. Several months after the opening ceremony, the Workforce Development Center had become a place where hope felt practical instead of distant. Every morning classrooms filled with adults learning new skills, interview rooms welcomed job seekers preparing for fresh opportunities, and local employers regularly stopped by to meet future employees. The hallway walls displayed photographs of graduates celebrating their first paychecks, families moving into permanent homes, and students completing certification programs they once believed were impossible. Eliza often paused in front of those pictures before beginning each day because they reminded her that every quiet decision had created a visible future for someone else. One Friday evening, after the last class had ended and the volunteers finished cleaning the building, Declan asked if she had time for one more stop before going home. She smiled. As long as it is not another meeting. He laughed. I promise. No meetings. Instead of driving toward downtown, they followed familiar streets until the car reached the same train bridge where everything had quietly begun. The evening air carried the first signs of winter once again. Several familiar faces gathered nearby, greeting Eliza with warm smiles as she handed out containers of homemade soup from the same faded canvas bag she had carried for years. Nothing about her routine had changed despite everything that had happened. She still remembered every name. She still asked about new jobs, medical appointments, grandchildren, and apartments. She still listened longer than she spoke. Declan stood beside her, helping distribute blankets and warm drinks without announcing who he was. When the last meal had been served and the conversation slowly came to an end, the two of them walked a short distance away from the crowd. They stood quietly beneath the bridge where the city lights shimmered across the pavement. Declan looked around before smiling. Do you know why I asked you to come here tonight? Eliza shook her head gently. I assumed you wanted to remember where the foundation began. It did begin here, he replied. But something else began here too. I simply needed more time to understand it. He reached into the pocket of his coat and carefully removed a small folded piece of paper. Eliza recognized it immediately. It was the handwritten shopping list she had accidentally dropped months earlier on the night he had first followed her. The words soup, socks, gloves, hats, blankets were still written across the page in neat blue ink. Declan smiled as he unfolded it. I picked this up after you walked away that evening. I kept it because it reminded me that greatness can be measured by the smallest acts of generosity. He folded the paper again and slipped it back into his pocket. It also reminded me of the woman who completely changed the way I looked at leadership success, and even my own life. Eliza felt her eyes fill with quiet emotion. Before she could respond, Declan continued. The foundation has changed thousands of lives, but the greatest gift I received was meeting you. You never cared about my wealth. You never treated me differently because of my title. You challenged me to become a better man simply by being yourself. He took a slow breath before speaking the words he had carried in his heart for months. Eliza Rowan, would you allow me to spend the rest of my life building something even more meaningful with you? He opened a small velvet box containing a simple, elegant ring that reflected the city lights without unnecessary extravagance. For a brief moment, the world around them seemed completely still. Eliza smiled through grateful tears, remembering the frightened employee who had once stepped into an executive conference room believing she was about to receive criticism instead of opportunity. She thought about every conversation, every shared challenge, every person whose life had been touched because one stranger had chosen to notice another person's quiet kindness. Looking into Declan's eyes, she answered with complete certainty. Yes, I would. Nearby, several volunteers noticed the moment and began applauding with joyful surprise. The elderly woman who had once received the television interview embraced Eliza warmly, while former program participants celebrated as though a member of their own family had found happiness. Months later, their wedding remained simple, welcoming volunteers, employees, graduates of the foundation, business partners, and neighbors who had become lifelong friends. During the reception, Declan quietly thanked everyone for believing in a mission that had started with one unnoticed act of compassion. Eliza simply smiled and reminded every guest that kindness never becomes smaller when it is shared. It becomes a reason for someone else to believe again. Together, they continued leading the foundation, proving year after year that true wealth is never measured by the size of a fortune, but by the number of lives forever changed through integrity, humility, and love. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to the Billionaire's Choice. Every week, we bring you heartwarming stories of love, destiny, and life-changing decisions. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.